Hello everyone, so you joined me back for prepping my materials this time. I'm using the same materials from the last video that I unboxed, and I'm going to be preparing my mesh, the webbing mesh, and I'm going to be dyeing my leaves as well, and you'll see what I do for each of those. For the green webbing mesh, I started out by cutting it down to like half the size it was originally, and then I just took my scissors and cut it right down the middle, so I had about half of what I originally started out with when I opened up the package. After I split the mesh into two separate pieces, I did like a little experiment, and I tried dyeing one portion of the mesh, and it didn't go so well. So I'm gonna tell you right now, the green dark webbing mesh is not good to dye, which is pretty much what I expected. Now that I finished trying that, I went to start spray painting the mesh. So I just laid out the mesh on the grass, and I used Rust-Oleum camouflage tan paint so that you could still see the tan covering as it covers the green mesh as I'm spray painting. And I just lightly covered the mesh, and I went over it a few times, and after that it was pretty much finished. Now the key to spray painting the mesh for me was not completely covering the entire piece of mesh with tan. You want to leave spots of green here and there. For the pieces that were more solid green color and didn't get spray painted as well, I cut a square piece of mesh, and I decided to add a little bit of moss to the mesh. So I started out by adding glue right down the center of the mesh, and then folding over two flaps so that it turns into like a rectangular strip for adding the moss to it. At this point, it's pretty simple. All you do is just add a thin layer of glue to the first side, and then you just add the moss, the artificial moss that I had in the first video that I showed you guys, and you just keep adding the moss until the front side's completely covered. Let it dry, and then you flip it over, and then you add moss to the second side. So yeah, that's pretty much all I did to liven up my mesh fabric. So you can have it in strips with the moss like in these photos, or you could have it in strips without the moss with just the spray paint added. Moving on to the items I use to dye my leaves with. Everything you see in this little clip right here is everything I use, so make sure you have these ready and on hand to use to dye your leaves. I started out dyeing my leaves with the RIT dye. It's an amazing dye to use, and all these items, including the leaves that you see in this clip, are all bought off of Amazon and easy for you to get. When you go to dye the leaves, make sure you use the lighter colored leaves. The yellows and the greens work best for the brown dye and the green dye, but the red leaves and the reddish brown leaves don't work as well, and honestly they just don't work at all, so don't use those leaves, just set them aside. So first you want to just take some dish soap and drop it into the pan, the stainless steel pot, and fill it up like 3/4 the way full with water. So once you filled up your stainless steel pan with water and dish soap, set it on the stove and set the stove to high. Then you want to take your lid and set it on top of the pan, and once it's boiling, that's when you know your water with dish soap is ready to add the leaves in. So once it's ready, add the leaves in to the water and let it sit for around 15 to 20 minutes. And then you want to grab your bowl and grab the spoon and take out the leaves very carefully, because the water will still be at a boiling temperature. And in this case I used a spoon with holes in it, but you can just use a regular spoon, it doesn't matter, as long as you have a bowl to strain the water with and let it sit for a little bit to cool off. Another thing you can do to cool down the leaves faster is just adding water to the leaves. After you finish soaking your leaves with water, grab your 1 teaspoon spoon and fill it up with dish soap and drop it into the pan and add it to the water. Just do the same thing, fill up the pan with 3/4 the way full with cold water. At the same time as your pan is boiling on the stove, you want to shake your RIT dye very well, and after your water is done boiling, you just add the dye in very slowly and carefully so that none of the water comes back and burns your hand or anything like that. At the same time, while your water is boiling for 15 to 20 minutes, just stir the water very gently and carefully. So for the brown dye, I use the yellowish and orangish colored leaves for the brown dye, and that works the best to get your leaves fully brown and not like a darker shade of black. For the best possible results, make sure to set the timer for 20 minutes so that the leaves get completely covered with the dye, and make sure you constantly stir the leaves. This will give you the best results. Once the timer goes off, you'll know that the leaves have had enough time to soak in the dye. So set the leaves into the bowl slowly and carefully. When you finish that, take the leaves from the bowl and put them into the strainer. Then the next step you're going to want to do is add the warm water to the leaves, and then turn the knob to cold and slowly add cold water to the leaves for around just a minute or so, and that should be good, and then you can set them out to dry. The last step you'll need to do to prep your leaves is set them out on a piece of newspaper. Make sure you either double up on the newspaper or just add a old towel and set them underneath the newspaper. Yeah, that's about all you have to do for the prepping of your leaves and dyeing them. So do the same steps as you did with the brown leaves and use those steps for the green dye on your leaves. Now that's pretty much all I have for this video, and there will be a third part to this entire crafting series of the Novritsch Leaf Suit, and trust me, you will want to see the ending product of this video, because the leaf suit that I crafted, it turned out great. I mean, I am a beginner at this and it's no expert crafting suit, but it's pretty good, and I'm pretty pleased with it. So definitely, if you want to see the rest, stay tuned for the last part, and I'll see you guys next time.